It started out like any normal visit to the clinic. 12-year-old Emily had been complaining of stomach pains on and off for weeks, and her dad, Greg, finally decided to bring her in for a checkup. The waiting room was quiet, just the usual. Sounds of papers shuffling and kids scrolling on their phones. But the moment they walked into the doctor's office, something felt ... off. Emily sat stiffly, barely making eye contact, her hands locked tightly in her lap. And every time her dad tried to speak for her, she would flinch or glance nervously at the floor. The doctor noticed right away. At first, he figured she might just be shy or anxious about being at the clinic. But as the exam continued, her behavior grew more concerning. When the doctor gently asked her a few questions, Emily hesitated, then gave answers that didn't quite match her dad's version of events. That's when he decided to order an ultrasound, just to be safe. But nothing could have prepared him. For what appeared on the screen, the doctor's expression changed instantly from calm and casual to wide-eyed and tense. He asked the nurse to step out of the room, then looked Greg straight in the eye and asked him to wait outside. Greg hesitated, confused. Why? He asked. The doctor didn't answer right away, because what he saw on that ultrasound raised questions no one in the room was ready to face, and the truth was only beginning to surface. Greg waited in the hallway, pacing slowly, glancing toward the exam room every few seconds. He had no idea what the doctor had seen, only that something about the ultrasound had rattled him. Inside, Emily sat quietly, her eyes wide and fixed on the ceiling. The doctor gently asked her a few more questions, this time speaking in a calm, reassuring voice. "Emily, is there something you want to tell me? You're safe here." She didn't respond right away. She just stared ahead, her hands still clutching the edge of the table. Meanwhile, the nurse quietly printed the ultrasound images and handed them to the doctor, her face tight with concern. The scan showed something strange. There was unusual swelling in Emily's abdomen, but it didn't match any of the common causes the doctor expected. It wasn't something she could have eaten. It wasn't a typical illness. And worst of all, looked like it had been there for a while, trying to stay calm. The doctor asked Emily if she'd had any accidents, if she'd fallen, or if anyone had hurt her. She finally shook her head, but the hesitation was enough to raise even more questions. When the doctor asked if she felt safe at home, her eyes filled with tears. Outside, Greg still had no idea what was going on. He checked his watch, growing more impatient by the minute. But inside that exam room, the pieces of a much deeper mystery were starting to form, and the truth was just beneath the surface. The doctor knew he needed more than just a scan to understand what was really going on. He stepped out of the exam room and quietly called in a pediatric specialist and a social worker. This wasn't just about a physical issue anymore. There were signs of something emotional, something possibly psychological. Emily's silence, her strange reactions around her dad, and the abnormal ultrasound results were all adding up. But the picture still wasn't clear. When the specialist arrived, she sat beside Emily and spoke gently. Not as a doctor, but like someone who truly wanted to help. She asked simple questions. "Do you like school? Who do you talk to when you're upset?" Emily answered in whispers. It became clear she hadn't spoken much to anyone lately, not even to friends. Something had made her shut down. And each time her dad's name was mentioned, her body would stiffen just a little. Back in the hallway, Greg was starting to grow defensive. He didn't like being kept out of the room and kept asking what was going on. But the staff stayed calm, explaining they just needed to do a few more evaluations. Behind closed doors, the doctor and social worker discussed the possibility of past trauma, something Emily hadn't shared yet. Maybe something she didn't fully understand herself. As more pieces came to light, it wasn't just a medical mystery anymore. This was something deeper, something hidden. And the one person Everyone assumed had answers might not be telling the full story as the hours passed. The atmosphere inside the clinic grew heavier. Emily sat in a quiet room now, away from the exam table, with a counselor by her side. Her shoulders were tense, her eyes tired, but something had changed. She was beginning to open up, piece by piece. She mentioned having strange dreams, feeling watched even when she was alone. She said she didn't feel safe at home, though she never pointed a clear finger. Everything was vague, but just enough to raise alarm. Meanwhile, Greg was moved to a separate area and asked more questions. He insisted he was just a concerned father. He claimed he worked long hours and barely had time to take care of Emily lately, but the staff noticed inconsistencies. He had said earlier that he worked from home. When questioned about Emily's recent behavior, he grew frustrated, even slightly defensive. "She's always been quiet," he snapped. "She's sensitive. That's just how she is." But medical records began to tell a different story. The clinic pulled Emily's previous checkups. There was a pattern of visits over the past year for stomach pain, sleep trouble, and anxiety. None of them ever led to a real diagnosis. Each time, Greg had done most of the talking. Emily had barely said a word now with the ultrasound findings, the strange emotional responses, and a father who was growing increasingly impatient. The staff felt the pressure mounting. Something wasn't right, and whatever it was, the truth felt dangerously close. Just as the clinic staff prepared to contact Child Protective Services, another layer to the mystery surfaced. The pediatric specialist reviewing Emily's scan noticed something strange, not just swelling, but a small, irregular mass that didn't belong. It wasn't life-threatening, but it wasn't natural either. The doctor couldn't say for sure what it was without further testing, but it looked like a small foreign object, something that had been inside her for a while. Quietly, he ordered a more detailed scan, and that's when things took an unexpected turn. The technician came back moments later with confusion in her voice. "There's something metallic showing up near her lower abdomen," she said softly. "It doesn't look like something that could have been swallowed." The doctors exchanged glances. This wasn't a typical medical case anymore. It now involved questions that stretched beyond illness and straight into human behavior. When asked again if anything had ever happened at home or anywhere else that made her feel afraid, Emily finally whispered something that sent chills through the room. "I didn't mean to break it." "Break what?" The counselor pressed gently, but Emily wouldn't say more. Back in the hallway, Greg suddenly asked to leave. He said they'd been at the clinic too long and that Emily could rest better at home. But the request came just minutes after the scan results were flagged. The timing was too sharp to ignore, and now, with two professionals concerned and new evidence emerging, the question wasn't just what happened to Emily, was who else already knew. Just as Greg was preparing to leave, a security guard gently blocked the exit. The clinic had already contacted the authorities after the discovery on Emily's scan. Within minutes, two officers arrived quietly, speaking first with the doctor and counselor. Emily was moved to another room, away from her dad, as professionals began piecing the final puzzle together. Under questioning, Emily finally opened up more. The thing inside her. She didn't know exactly what it was, only that one night she had found a small device in her backpack that didn't belong to her. She had dropped it. It broke, and she tried to hide it. A few weeks later, the pain started. It sounded impossible until the doctors examined the object further and realized it wasn't an accident. It was a tiny tracking chip. Not medical, not common. Something you wouldn't expect a child to even know about. When Greg was confronted with this information, his face went pale. But instead of denying it, he did something unexpected, he confessed. Not to harming Emily, but to watching her. His voice cracked as he said he'd been afraid something would happen to her, especially after losing his wife years earlier. So, He tracked her movements, hid the device, and told himself it was to protect her. But his obsession with control had gone too far. The final twist wasn't Greg who placed the device. It was someone from Emily's school, someone she'd stopped trusting months ago, and her strange behavior around her dad. It was fear, but not of him. It was fear he wouldn't believe her. After hours of questions and tears, the full truth finally came to light. The tracker had been planted by an older student from Emily's school, someone who had taken advantage of her trust during after-school programs. When it broke, Emily was too scared to speak up, unsure of what it even was or how to explain it. Her fear made her pull away from everyone, including her dad. And Greg, dealing with his own guilt and paranoia, misread her distance as something darker, which only made her more closed off. Greg's overprotectiveness was misguided, but the investigation confirmed he hadn't hurt her. Instead, his constant control made it harder for Emily to open up when something was really wrong. With counseling and support, both of them began to understand each other better. Greg agreed to family therapy and parenting support, determined to build back the trust he had unintentionally shaken. The student responsible was identified and disciplined, and school officials reviewed their safety procedures.